right. I've been assured that you can hear me. Is that correct? Yeah? Okay. I'm going to be reading just because every time I don't read, I leave out half of what I wanted to say. So I try to be as entertaining as possible while reading. And I will talk about some projects that didn't quite work, and some projects that I did work. And then later in the seminar, if we want to have a longer discussion about how things worked and don't work, that's fine. So first I think it's important when you begin to be able to place yourself as an artist within history. So I begin a little bit about my past. So I was one of the first in my family to go to the university, and I wanted to contribute something to Brazil. And in Brazil at that time, this is the 70s, we did not have a national indigenous organization, and yet many struggles throughout the country and no support and no visibility, and too many massacres. I thought a national organization could bring support and solidarity to the frontline people who were in isolated and precarious situations. That light over there is really hard. Is there any way to tape it over? It's that one that's right there. No, that's the projector light. Okay, right. No, unfriendly. Okay. In 1978, I joined the International Indian Treaty Council to learn how to organize a national indigenous organization. It's not something that you can kind of sign up for at a weekend course. And this image here is of Tupaí, a Guarani leader in the state of Mato Grosso do Sul. He's standing, okay, to the right of him is the end of the reservation area, and he's pointing to where if one had to have a borderline, that it should have been where that hill is in the background, but it was delimited very close by. I traveled to this is the Campestre Reservation in the state of Mato Grosso do Sul. It is a cattle ranching colonial settler state. And Tupaí explained that just a month earlier, remember there was no social media, the UNI, the National Indigenous Organization, had been formed. And so my efforts were needed in international work instead. Tupaí was assassinated 3 years later, and his killers were never imprisoned. This area has about one indigenous leader killed a week. 300 have been killed documented in the last 10 years while waiting demarcation, which is basically not going to happen after the new president we have. My first works were about where my parents were from, and I did this while a student at Cooper Union. I interviewed us and asked us what did we want the world to know about us. It was not about what the world wanted to know, but what we wanted the world to know. And I think that's an important difference in that work. In a colonial context of Brazil, the educated elite are European Brazilians, and they control history. They think the making of it, but surely the writing of it. And things started to change, but now they're becoming worse again if you follow Brazilian politics. And I'm going to go through just a few images from that work I did while in Cooper. This was 34 years ago. It never found a publisher till this year. So in the fall, it will come out. Okay. This is an image of where my uncle Antonio was going to work. He is a peasant, and in the wintertime, when there was no money and food, like it happens all over the world in the rural situations in the winter, men in my father's village searched for work in the local town or plantations. Uncle Antonio found work in this just torched indigenous forest, which was being made into a eucalyptus plantation, receiving government monies for reforestation, government monies that we will have to pay as taxpayers. These trees rapidly destroy the soil. I call them toilet paper forests, for that is what the trees are grown for toilet paper. They are known locally as the silent forest, as there are no food. The eucalyptus kills off all the underground vegetation, so birds don't even hang out there. So when he and the other men of the village went to the plantation, they were afraid of being made into slaves, and they asked me to come along and make believe I was a journalist. Remember, at this time, I was an art student at Cooper Union. And to take as many photos of the men as possible so that if they were made into slave, I could prove that they existed. This was my first commissioned work. Uncle Antonio's fear is well-founded and not uncommon. Already in the 17th century, a European writer reported that he had not seen one free indigenous person from the coast of São Paulo to the border with Argentina. 50,000 slaves have been freed in Brazil by the Anti-Slavery Task Force since it was created in 1995. Okay, 1995, not 1895. Okay. Right now, there are 160,000 slaves in Brazil. That's considered a very low estimate. The current government is supportive of a new definition of slavery, that the work for room and board is indeed payment and not slavery, and has made the list of companies that use slave labor very difficult to access when it was public information under the previous government. This is also an image from my father's village, and here is a clear visualization of one aspect of land struggles in Brazil. These men, descendants of Caingang people, have found on their maize and bean fields these pigs, which originally arrived with the European invasion, and have caused much damage along with chicken and cattle to the environment. These pigs have destroyed much of the produce which was to be their food for the year. They want justice. In the years after this image was taken, they were to lose. Today, my father's village has become consolidated into cattle ranches and eucalyptus tree plantations. This is one of my favorite relatives, well, both of them, grandmother Mané and Sergio. This was a work for the second Havana Biennale. It's called, in English, The Documentation of Sameness, and living on $10 a month. This is Sergio, and he's picking potatoes for 30 cents a day at this time. That's his grandmother. She earns $1 a week sewing quilts. And that last image of him, oh, and sometimes when she gets drunk, she tries to drown Sergio when Sergio was young. And that is Sergio, who at that time he would gather the prettiest seashells along the river, which were there were not too many pretty seashells, so it was something he would spend the whole day at it, and then he would just smash them. I had a complicated life. Earlier this year, I went back to visit, and I had a mental list of all the things that were surely worse. Consolidation of land, eucalyptus tree plantations, and erosion. But I did not, in my wildest imagination, could have thought that we would now have a vocal Nazi in the village. We have European immigrants who participated in massacres of indigenous peoples, and we have the remnants of indigenous communities, like my father, and we have survivors of slavery also. And all of that is just typical of the Americas. I wanted to visit the forest in a way to give homage to Sergio, who has since been killed senselessly. This forest used to exist in bits and pieces throughout the village, but it has since been cut away for the eucalyptus trees. My aunt took me to a remote corner of the village where there was still some forest intact. It was the property of this young man. Oh no, this is Sergio in the forest, sorry. This is Sergio in the forest 34 years ago. And this is today this young man, okay? He is the founder of the evangelical church in the village, which now my favorite aunt is frequenting. And as we walked in, he shouted to his workers to put on some banana leaves and dance and sing like Indians. He continued to make racist remarks throughout the visit, and on the way back to the car, I did say that we in front of him were the Indians. Then I was in the car, and I thought I heard the mention of Adolf Hitler, and just thought it was a mishearing. and yet it was repeated again. He was telling this young woman to read Mein Kampf. A great book, he said. A German friend next to me jumped out of the car to confront him. Okay. This man has also convinced my aunt that she is not indigenous. So this was my welcome back after 34 years. One tries to think of everything that can go wrong, but one's imagination does not reach the depth of stupidities of one's country, does it? Okay. So after I graduated from Cooper, 3 years later, I was in Brazil and some friends, two friends, and I founded the Partido Verde in the state of São Paulo. The Partido Verde already existed, but only in Rio de Janeiro. It was very inactive at that time. We first spent some weeks analyzing what the existing political parties could offer for the future in Brazil, and there were many. There were more than 60 parties. Democracy was beginning after a long military dictatorship, and there was an explosion of political possibilities that had been repressed for over 2 decades. We realized that none could offer a different approach to what has been the history of politics in Brazil. After much discussion of possibilities, we thought that a Green Party at that time would be an interesting proposition to develop in São Paulo. Our first meeting had about 20 people, our next 80, and so on. We elected officials in many levels of offices in Brazil by now. And at the writing of our state political program, I was able to include indigenous concerns such as the demarcation of indigenous lands and guarantee of the survival of indigenous people as a second paragraph of point 2. I like to put this, because it was so much effort, as a small piece of paper, and it consumed my life for such a long time. I like to keep remembering it, the amount of energy put into this paragraph of point 2. This was not easy. There was a desire to include it at the very end of the program, and I would rather have had it as point 1. Later in the writing of the national program, where I was not present, I was not invited, indigenous rights was moved to point 5 in the environmental section of the Amazon. I do not know what they were thinking of concerning all the native peoples that do not live in the Amazon. In the late 80s, we saw our priority as the elections of city council members and participating in the making of the new constitution. This is a time of extreme tension in Brazil, with the military threatening yet another coup if amnesty for their crimes was removed, or if their power was in any way weakened. We would get calls from friends warning of imminent coup possibilities. We all had our suitcases packed by the door at this time. We were able, through alliances with a wide variety of political parties, to include progressive amendments on the environment. We were able to introduce, for the first time, the environment as a separate concept. There was also a separate section, which I did not work on indigenous peoples, recognition of indigenous peoples, cultural rights, and land. But the current government has made a new decree as of August of this year that allows the federal government onto indigenous lands with no prior warning or consultation to do whatever they want. It is thought by some that indigenous lands has thus been negotiated in order to be given to the agriculture and rancher lobby in exchange for supporting the president against a case of corruption charges that was to be brought against him. It was dropped. This happened last week, if you've read the newspapers. That happened because of indigenous lands that have been now opened up to the ranchers. And at this time, I did do all this political work because a constitution is written by senators. Senators are part of the ranchers and agricultural lobby. And it is through political pressure that they voted for environmental laws. And so that's why I was involved in politically. But after that, there's a huge amount of energy that goes into this whole. And I don't see my efforts resulting in anything in Brazil for a long time. So I stopped working in politics and just concentrated on working as an artist. But of course, I could go back to that anytime I think it's important. Now I'll talk about art. That's why we're here, no? So this is Berrada. It's 1992. It was a work in Corumbá, in Mato Grosso do Sul, where the state that Tupã is from. I invited Canadian artist Lynn LaPointe to join me. We each did our own works on this piece of land near the Paraguay River. Water comes up and covers the land many months of the year, and the fence lines disappear. And there is a confusion of what is yours and not yours, and public and private. And I was very intrigued by this, and this is what I was working on. The land being free from private ownership and enclosure. So for example, when it's the waters come up, there's the fence lines, and you'll see the cattle walking in a straight line with just their heads up. So then you'll know that that's the property line. But people have a hard time figuring out what's theirs and not theirs, and I just really liked this confusion. And it was the water that made it. This was one of my first installations, and it was unsuccessful. My idea was that the water coming up would take away all of that the fence lines in the photographs. It's about measuring in the fence line. And this is the photograph, the same image again of the demarcation. This is another failed work. It's called Amatlan. Don't worry, we're going to get to some successful projects soon. This is Amatlan is where Quetzalcoatl, whom I consider the patron of artists, he likes farming, cooking, sex, music, and art. This is where he walked upon the earth as a person, the village of Amatlan. And I was interested in trying to get some European descendant friends in Mexico to be in a forest and walk around without the notion of arriving at the top of the mountain, which is the tendency one has in this area of Mexico. So I had these elements, and they were all together in one place, and then one was left in a place, and 20 minutes later, 4 would move to another, and then 3, 2, etc., until you got to the end, which is where the waterfall is. And my idea was that at the end there would be a celebration by the water. And although the visitors did remove themselves from the idea of getting to the top, it really didn't work out because it just became a chat in the forest. You know, people did spend time in the forest in one place, but it was just chatting. It wasn't very much about being in the forest or looking. And the person that lent me their home to do the work, he was expelled from the village. In both this project and the Bajabar project, you're dealing with, well, I'll explain it after the next one, but they also thought I was a witch. So this is very problematic in these situations. Because you know what happens to witches, right? In Catholic countries. So now, Deutéo de Ep. And this was in Senegal. And it's a former French colony. The economy is based on peanuts and dried fish. There were about 12 artists who were invited to spend up to a month in Joal Fayouth, which is a town about an hour from Dakar if the road was good. It's not. And so I got there, and I was very happy to find that Joal Fayouth is the town is very small, so the agriculture area is just a few minutes walk from the town. And I was given another chance to try to figure out to make something work in the countryside. Since my family, they're from the countryside, I'm always very much wanting to do something that will relate to the community in the countryside, but also be part of the art discourse. So the 2 previous projects had failed, and here I am trying again. So I got a sketchbook. I'm horrible at drawing, and I don't use that sketching at all, that kind of thing. But I wanted to figure out how to talk to people, and so I thought if I carried a sketchbook, they would ask me questions about being an artist, and then we could begin a discussion. And I did that for about a week, and nothing really interesting was happening because all we did was have very cliched discussions. So I gave up on the sketchbook, gave it to some people, and just took my writing pad, basically, and started working. And I started these long walks, but I was always a bit nervous because it's a savanna, and I didn't know you have to really know where you're going to be able to get home before dark. And then I met Musa Gay, who's a young high school student, and I asked him if he knew the way to the next village so then I could figure out how to get back. And he said it wasn't a good idea to go by myself because I wouldn't be able to figure it out. So he offered to take me next time after classes. So we became friends, and I would always drop him off at his parents' home, and then after we walked, and then continue on to my own place. And we always were passing this island, and finally one day he stopped to talk about this island. It's called Dioteuteep, which means Cemetery of the Respected Animals, which means horses, cows, dogs, no cats. And he said that they weren't using it anymore. And I asked why. He said because we, the younger generation, are lazy. And I said, well, did he think it was a ritual that was important to bring back? And he said yes, because the young men are responsible for taking the heavy animals, putting them in a small boat, like a rowboat type of thing, and taking it past the last wave break and dumping the dead animals. But the young men are lazy, as he said, and don't do that. They just take it out a little bit in the sea. So the animals come back with the waves. And the women get very angry because they're responsible for washing clothes, and there's water problems there, so the women use salt water. And it was in horrible condition because of these animals' decomposing parts. So we agreed that this was an important ritual to bring back. So since my mother's family, they come from a very small town, and as a 14-year-old, it was very difficult to be in that little town because people gossip a lot, and they invented things that I never did. Then I discovered, well, if they said this about me, I will actually start doing them, which kind of liberated me at 14. So I thought, gossip, this is the perfect moment to use gossip. So you see there is that little tree, the only big tree that's standing in the background. And so we're looking at it from the road, and it's the road people go from the small town to the agricultural fields. So they do this every day. They go, and in the afternoon they come back. So we chose the most prominent spot, and Musa and I were there all day for 5 days. And my idea was they have to gossip. A young man and a woman on a secluded spot, that's ripe for gossip. And they have to use the name, the older people will use the name Dioteuteep, which means the Cemetery of the Respected Animals. And in doing so, we would return the word back into the community. And after this, I would make sure that more gossip was created by us having a coffee at the local bar. So I really used all my talents at this. We could have a gossip class, right? And we did this, and I would thought in about a month, maybe the dead animals would be placed in the cemetery. I was leaving that weekend, so Musa was supposed to write to me if it worked out or not. But on my last day in Joal Fayut, oh wait, sorry, this is a close-up, right? These are the local people from Joal going to the fields to work. On the last day, it was like this. So it was much quicker than, the gossip system is much quicker than Brazil, which would have taken about a month. This was 5-6 days, it worked. So the ritual came back, and less pollution in the water to wash clothes. Why did this work? And this is what I wanted to figure out, and I was astonished it did. And it's because of a simple thing, which is not so simple. The people there at all times felt that they were citizens of their place. And I use citizens not to refer to passports, but in the real sense, that you are a member of your community and you are engaged and involved. Everyone there that I encountered thought so. They really questioned all the artists. They came to the opening, and it was a wonderful experience to work in this community because they feel they are part of it. Such was not the case in Amatlan, and such was not the case in Corumba, where Bahabar was done. There was no sense of community and engagement, no sense that you could figure out what you wanted in your community, and therefore fear. And therefore, that is why I was a witch. No? And I think it is not the job of an artist to do that, because it is hundreds of years or decades of years of work that is necessary to make people engaged in their community. And it's not going to be one artwork that's going to do it. And it must involve the education system. It must involve all aspects of society so that you are engaged instead of one artwork. No? So you have to figure out, is there a situation where it is possible to work as an artist in that situation? Here I will talk about the return of a lake, which is work in Mexico. There is a museum of immigration in the small town of Colombres in Asturias, Spain, which mentions the desiccation of Lake Chalco in Mexico as an outstanding work of engineering done by Inigo Noriega Lazo, who is from Colombres in Asturias. I was in Mexico and decided to visit Chalco because I was curious to understand how a country, Spain, who is part of the EU, where there are strict environmental laws, can still be celebratory in the 21st century on the desiccation of a lake in an area that it has now scarcity of water and where water trucks bring in water. So this is an image of the lake that was desiccated in the region of Chalco, Xico, near Mexico City. I'll explain why you're seeing water. Bear with me. And then I get to use this wonderful tool. Okay. So Inigo Noriega, the Spanish immigrant who wanted the land underneath the lake to add to his possessions, he would also become Mexico's second richest man. The draining of the lake was a catastrophe for the region. It was drained in 1908 and caused the collapse of the region's commerce and adversely affected the livelihood of 24 indigenous towns and villages. And now the tool. Okay. So Mexico City was, well, a typical problem where the person moves their face. Okay. Mexico City had 5 lakes. All of this has been desiccated. A lot of this has been desiccated, and all of this was desiccated. So what we have now is this tiny, we have Chalco here, and a little bit of the return of Xochimilco here, and a little bit of the return of Chalco here, and bits and pieces of the remaining lakes up there. Okay. Pre-European invasion, Chalco was considered the granary of what is now Mexico City, producing enough food to feed 170,000 people with pre-Hispanic technique of chinampas, which are islands engineered by people and are considered the most sustainable agricultural method in Mesoamerica. Mud is scooped up from the lake floor, put on a construction like a large basket, and filled with stones. Ahuehuete trees are planted on the sides and corners so that their long roots attach the structure to the lake bed, so in the morning you don't have to find your cornfield. And no exhausting, back-breaking watering of the fields is done since the water comes up naturally. This is Chalco pre-Inigo Noriega. Among the chinampas are canals designed by the indigenous communities throughout the lake to allow for the passage. I should go back to the other ones. This you get a better sense. To allow for the passage of water traffic. There was an immense amount of commercial goods being brought up from Veracruz, going through this area and going up to what is now Mexico City. The communities contribute communal labor to maintain the canal free from vegetation and make it navigable. when Inigo Noriega Lazo from Columbus, Asturias dried up the lake, all the Chinampas dried up too. This is what he dried up, all that blue area. He had a private army of 250 soldiers who expelled the Chalcos people from Xico, the island. This is mentioned in, this is a photograph from the museum in Asturias. And it says there, the infantry, the formed infantry in the principal hacienda house in Xico. And they don't comment on that fact that it might be strange to have your private infantry of 250 soldiers and what that might mean for the indigenous people. There's no comment. And the person who is the director of the museum is the founder of the museum, and there's a section, there's an anti-fascist room of the museum, and the man is a leftist. Colonialism. Okay. This is Raimundo Martinez, a Chalca whose grandparents were forcibly expelled by Inigo. He's pointing to a bit of the returning lake. They were relocated from that area to an area that has poor agricultural fields. And when this work was in Documenta, that area for the first time was the epicenter of an earthquake because of subsidence, because of the water being taken out. And here, this is where they were removed to from here to there. This is the river Tlamanalco, known as the Company Canal, which was made into a canal by Inigo instead of a river to assist in the desiccation of the lake. Today it is an open-air canal for the untreated raw sewage of 10 municipalities, 5 million people, and industrial waste. It is the poorest of the poor who live here, and many are single women with children. Due to lack of maintenance, the canal breaks periodically, releasing raw sewage and industrial waste into thousands of homes, mostly cleaned up by the community. There are 14 pumping stations that were put in to extract water from Chalco for Mexico City. And these pumping stations were put in when people in Chalco do not have water. So you're removing water from Chalco to send to Mexico City. And this is what happens. The water is removed at a very fast rate. The rain doesn't fill it up quickly enough, and you have land subsidence, which destroys also sewage pipes and all infrastructure. This is a crack due to the pumping of the water. It is 20 meters deep and 40 kilometers long. Some people with property adjoining the lake, the returning lake, dump construction waste in order to fill it, to make landfill, to be able to have more property. So a remake of Inigo Noriega Lazo. And this is the lake today. The lake is returning because of the water extraction. The land is lower than the water. So it's just gone. Some places it's 40 feet a year that it falls. It is now swallowing up the agricultural land of the indigenous communities, and it's starting to be contaminated by sewage and industrial waste. You can see it was a foggy day, probably contamination, but in the back you can see a little bit of the water that's returning, and you can see, I took this image from Xico, which was the island. So from where I'm standing to that water, that was the lake, and it's returning, and you see all those people that live there? Okay. There's a big concern about what is going to happen to all the people that are living there, and also to the farmers whose lands are disappearing with the water. They have agricultural methods that now are not Chinampas, and it's European agricultural methods, and they have also ranching, and this might disappear, bringing yet another economic disaster. But to those members of the indigenous communities that see the return of the lake with possible hope, I propose to the community the recreation of a functioning chinampa. This was realized with the help of the Community Museum of the Valle of Xico. We experimented with planting several different vegetables and flowers to see what would grow with the water that is now salinated. We had some successful results. Some of the produce went to the market. However, just recently, a person has somehow mysteriously become the owner of this communal property, has developed it to be sold as real estate plots, and is in the process, now past the process, of landfilling in the chinampas and destroying it once again. The Community Museum of the Valle of Xico was founded in 1995 and today holds 5,000 indigenous artifacts found by community members and which no official in town was interested in protecting. They are not funded by any government institutions. They want to maintain their independence. They have been expelled for political reasons from several of their exhibition spaces. This is Género Amaro Altamirano, who takes care of the museum. We would call him a director, but he doesn't like that title. This is the museum today. They were taken out of the other space and put in this space. And this is the stables of the former hacienda owned by Enigo Noriega Lazo. And they are fixing the other part they're in, and they dumped all the city, the municipality's old office things there, and they said that the museum could use this as their museum space. And this is some of the amazing artifacts they have. And this is my first meeting with the community in 2009, where I proposed the recreation of the chinampa, and I also asked what they wanted me to do. As an artist, what could I do? And they replied, tell our history, and that is why I have spoken about this project and this history very much in detail, because that is what they have asked me to do. In the community museum, when you first enter it, you are immediately taken to a maquette of the lake pre-invasion, and there are posters of local Zapatistas heroes. These influenced the installations I was to make for Documenta, where I worked with the maquettes for the first time, in deference to the museum's installation. So this was the Documenta work. This is a maquette of the lake, of the sewage canal, and of the island. And because of the Zapatistas' photographs and posters, I added also the heroes of the lake. There was, you see this image in the back of a building, reddish building. That's the Museum of the History of Mexico City. And I was interested in showing there this work. This was before Documenta, because it has huge paintings and frescoes of Mexico City, pre-Mexico City, with the chinampas. And I said, oh, this is a perfect place, because I don't even have to explain all that history. It's already there, so you're very well informed by the time you get to see the work. And the director of the space was very interested in showing my work, because she was organizing an exhibit of the water. And then I explained to her how I had gotten interested in this. I said, you know, Enigo Noriega Lazo, etc. And she said, oh, he was a relative of mine. And I said, oh, you know, I live in Germany, so of course I know we are not responsible for the sins of our grandparents if we do fight the privilege that those sins have brought us. No? Of course, the key thing is fight the privilege. So I asked her, oh, what do you think about him? Great man. So I left, and I went back to the community, and I said, look, there's an opportunity to exhibit this at the Museum of the City of Mexico, History of Mexico City, but there's this small detail. And they said, nope, and I said, thank you. And, but this is reality in a colonial situation, as you know. That's the sewage canal. Oh, and this part here, that's where the women usually live, single moms. Because this is the cheapest area to live in this very bad place. This mountain used to have forests. The forests were denuded. Trees were taken to Mexico City for the building of Mexico City, the cathedral, One of the doors of the Cathedral of Mexico City is from this area, from this hill. And so the water just comes crashing down very violently when it rains, and it always destroys the houses there. And it is the women with kids, and the women usually are single incomes, so there are the smallest houses. They're only one level. Some other houses might be 2 levels, but these houses are one. And the women don't have this, the help to be able to carry the refrigerator and the stove up to the roof to protect it on the floods. And so they end up losing all the goods, the valuable things of their homes. Okay. There was also a book that was published in conjunction with the installation, and I had always thought of this book as being a collective work, and I had always assumed that the Community Museum was going to co-sign it with me, but they asked not to co-sign it because history is too dangerous in Mexico, and they said they would like to blame somebody. So teachers are now using it to teach history, but they can always blame me. So it's like, this is the Maria Tereza Alvez, the historian, that says this. It's not me saying it. So it has worked out very fine for the community. Okay. This is July 2010. While museum members and I discussed the historical details of the book, 24 soldiers arrived to arrest the museum director, Genaro Amaro Altamirano. This is, we negotiated. Genaro had given me the museum papers. He had a knapsack. He said, take this and run. And I said, I can't run because I'm a foreigner here, and they might actually think that I might be powerful, and this might help the situation, because otherwise you definitely will be arrested. And he said, but these papers are more important than me. And I said, but you are important to the community. So he said, okay, find some place to hide, and then we see what happens. So I was hiding in the bathroom. Isn't it the stupidest place you could think to hide, right? Where are they going to look? The bathroom, right? And with my phone and my finger on the button to press to call Jose and Monica, help. And the lucky thing was that this was the commander of the 24 soldiers, and his children had gone to the museum. And he knew the work that the museum did. So we negotiated with him the skills that you learn as an artist. Please have that on your list. And we negotiated with him, and it was decided that Genaro did not pose imminent terrorist threat to the community, and that, yes, he would leave only one soldier behind to make sure that Genaro didn't do anything violent, and we could go back upon our business of dealing with the museum. Okay. Upon his return from Documenta, Genaro expanded the museum program to include contemporary art and a collective art group. These are images of some of their activities. They used to meet once a month, and then it was once a week, and then now it's several times a week. Okay, this is called the Return, a cycle of workshops around the Return of the Lake. During the exhibit of a Return of the Lake in the Museum of Contemporary Art in Mexico City, an extensive program was developed with the Community Museum. Among the most important was a cycle of water conferences organized by the Community Museum to be held at MUAC. Invited were activists from water struggles in the region. Since the 1970s, they have been extremely resistant to having their water being taken out. Scientists, academics, and community organizers were invited to formulate viable eco-sustainable development for the area and for the communities which live with the historical consequences of the desiccation. This work is an investigation of how colonial practices continue in place as a quotidian reality for indigenous communities and obstruct the possibility of a viable and ecologically sustainable future for all members of Mexican society. Now I will go through this a little bit. Now that you know the whole history, I can now explain this map a little bit better. These are the 14 pumping stations that took all the water out of this area to send to Mexico City. This is the island of Chico. These are like the big cracks here. This is the community museum is here. This is the one treatment sewage facility that exists. The pump is on the lower part of the area. So when it floods, the pump stops working because it gets destroyed, of course. So then disaster happens, as always. This is that canal, Tlamanalco, you see? And that's that curve you saw, which always breaks and has problems. This is the sewage, raw sewage. This is the area where the Chalcos were moved to. All of this area is raw sewage that comes down from this hill. On this hill is a real estate development that was awarded the worst real estate development of that year that it was built. I forgot the year. What else? The proposed Chinampa was here, but we didn't end up making it there. We ended up making it around here. Okay? But you see the bits and pieces of the water returning. And now I will speak about two projects from Brazil. This is a still from Iracema de Questember, a video based on a fictional narrative of an indigenous woman who inherits her father's property in France, where she founds an Institute of Art and Science. That is Shirley Krenak, who plays Iracema. She is a warrior of the Krenak Esplendor Reservation. But I'm not discussing the video, but what happened during and after. During the filming, her brother Tom Krenak gave me a large printout of a German Krenak dictionary put together by the German pharmacist in the early 1900s. Tom Krenak had seen that due to the genocide campaign by first the Portuguese and then the Brazilians, much of the Krenak language had therefore been deliberately removed from the community. And he wanted the dictionary translated to Portuguese so that the language could be returned to the community. My German is horrible. It's the language I've most spent money on learning and the least that has sunk into my brain. And so I gave it a try, but I realized that I couldn't do it. So the director of Mau Mau's Art Academy in Lisbon helped organize the translation. It is usually exhibited like that. Because the Krenaks requested that Brazilians, who have never wanted to speak with the Krenaks and only have wanted to kill them for the past 500 years, be given no access to their language. Okay. Also, as a result of the video, Shirley and I were talking, and then she told me that there is oral history of a Krenak, his name is Kwek, who had been taken in the late 1800s from their community, and she wanted to find out whatever happened to him. Then we found out that he had been taken by Prince Neuwied in Germany, where he was taken as a servant slave, and he eventually died there. I mean, not too long after he was taken, I think it was like 3 or 4 years. We wrote a letter to the descendants of Neuwied, and a few years later, Shirley's community received the remains of Kwek to be placed in the Esplendor Reservation. So I thought this was a work that, to me, was very important because Shirley and Tom taught me a lot about extending the idea of one's work. Also, I learned that in The Return of a Lake later on. But extending what one thinks is one work to respond always and to continue, even if one thought, oh, I'm doing a video. No, that's not your work. That can be one of your works, but you're there to respond And you just keep going and see what else might be needed. And this is the last work I will discuss. I did 3 workshops in indigenous communities in Brazil to realize a new work. Kapum. Is everybody all right? No. Are you okay? Did you hurt yourself? No? Okay. So I did this work for the 32nd São Paulo Biennale, and it's called A Possible Reversal of Missed Opportunities. And it had at its starting point the consistent exclusion of indigenous voice in contemporary society in Brazil, which denies agency to indigenous people in the making of a truly plural ethnic society, although Brazil talks about it all the time. It began with workshops in the city of Rio Branco in the state of Acre, and then the towns of Aquidauana and Dourados in the state of Mato Grosso do Sul. If you ever get a chance to go to Aquidauana and Dourados, don't. Please don't. They're horrible places. Amazing people there, but the towns and the settlers are horrible people. Okay, in the workshops, the indigenous-only participants developed a series of hypothetical conferences on various subjects of current interest to them. The conferences are hypothetical because they will never take place because there is no interest or support in Brazil for this. And I'd like to tell the story of Marcos Terena. He's an indigenous leader of the Terenas. And many years ago, early 80s, I was we were together at a conference, and he said this story, which I think is really important. He got a job. The only job he could get after leaving the reservation was in the Army, as this happens a lot with indigenous and black communities. That's the kind of job you get. And so he became a pilot, and he was with his captain flying to something. And his captain said, "Oh, Japanese." And we do this a lot in Brazil. Like if you're from Bahia and you're in the state of Amazon, the people say, "Oh, Baiano." People can say, if you look German in Brazil, they say, "Oh, Alemão." So it's a normal thing to say. It's not particularly racist at all. I mean, there's many other things that are racist in Brazil, but that was one of the things that aren't. So he said, "Oh, Japanese. Our plan of the day is, et cetera, et cetera." And Marcos Terena turned around to his captain and said, "Captain, there's something I've been meaning to tell you for years. I'm not Japanese. I'm Terena." And the captain doesn't even know who is a Terena. So he just stared at him and he said, "I'm an Indian, Captain. I'm an Indian. I'm not Japanese." Captain turned around to Marcos Terena and said, "You can't be an Indian. Indians don't fly." Okay. That is the state of mind of Brazil. So the end result of this work was a series of posters. There's 3, and they're in English and Portuguese, advertising the conferences. The posters are backdated a week before they were put up to give the impression that the event had already occurred. The posters were distributed throughout the city in which this workshop took place, and also in the universities, institutions, and public spaces. The idea was to place the conferences as an accomplished fact, allowing Brazilian society to notice the immense possibility of discourse and exchange which are not taking place due to the exclusion of indigenous voices in all fields of contemporary thought in Brazil. It is hoped that the public will see indigenous thinkers and their particular knowledge as essential to the making of Brazil. So my idea was to skip the colonial part and to actually get to the post-colonial part a little bit, you know? Keep talking about it, but it doesn't exist in Brazil. So I will talk about just one poster, this one here. The participants of the workshop in the Limão Verde Reservation in Aquidauana were mostly Terenas, and chose decolonization as the theme of their hypothetical conference. They discussed decolonization for schools, literature, history, technology, and society. Valdrene Souza Cardoso, who studies biology, would speak on Terena-oriented research. Ariane Denise Diaz Alonso Samaniego, a school teacher, would speak on the role of the reservation in decolonizing the narrative of the cowboy in Mato Grosso do Sul. And Naini Terena, one of the few indigenous people in Brazil who holds a doctorate and from one of the most prestigious universities in Brazil, would have spoken on Made in the Reservation, the human being through indigenous eyes. As the local university refused to support our work, the participants then created the Federal University of the Limão Verde Reservation for the conference to take place, hypothetically. At the same time, they founded the Terena Postdoctoral Association, though I think Naini might be the only member. The Guarani Kaiowá Postdoctoral Association, although I think there would be no members yet. The Association of Indigenous Women Scientists, again, I think there might be one or two. And the Association of Terena Women Warriors, of which there could be many, hundreds. And the Tupai Front for the Liberation of Guarani Kaiowá Lands. So this is schools and on the lower part in town. And this is an important thing that happened. It happened this year while I was in Brazil working on another project. It turned out, Naini wrote to me and said, Maria Tereza, I'm in a conference, the first national symposium of psychology committed to the social needs. And I was surprised because indigenous peoples are not invited to such situations. There has to be the Day of the Indian, it has to be something on indigenous land struggles or something of that sort, but not as the first symposium like that. So I was quite surprised, and then she told me that she had been invited because one of the members of the Sylvia Lane Psychology Institute, which is, I think, attached to PUC, which is one of these prestigious universities in Brazil, went to the Biennale and saw the poster, and then he saw Naini's name there, and he saw that she had a postdoc, and invited her to give a speech there. She was not the first to speak, but she was the last speaker, the last speaker on the first day, and she gave a most brilliant talk, and really wowed them. So this is, that was that little step that we took with the fake posters. So I was very happy for Naini. And I had been reading texts on decolonizing the imagination. We all read those texts, but I never did quite understand how that actual process would happen. And it was together with these different communities that we began this, and I was just really amazed to see that you can do it. And Edna de Souza, she is the daughter of Tupai. She's a retired school teacher. She attended the workshop, and it was an immense honor. She attended the workshop in Dourados, and she saw that it worked, the process. We met later in São Paulo during the Biennale. She came to visit the exhibit. And then at the Biennale, she told me that she wanted to figure out how to apply my method here, which I don't consider it my method, but our method that we developed together, to land issues. So that gives me a bit of hope in the mess of Brazil right now, where there is not much to be hopeful for.